Good morning. When Jesus was just a few days old, he was taken to the temple by his parents to fulfill the requirements of the law. And while there, they met Simeon, an aged prophet. Now, God had promised Simeon that before he died, he would see the Messiah. So when Simeon saw this child, he realized that this was the Messiah, and overjoyed, he prayed to God and he said, "You can now let your servant go in peace. He could die happy." He said, "Because just as you promised, my eyes have seen the salvation which you have prepared for all the nations to see." However, he had this to say to Mary. He said, "You see this child? He is destined for the fall and for the rising of many in Israel, and a sword will pierce your own soul too." And sure enough, when Jesus was about 33 years old, he was put to death in an awful fashion. And it was as if a sword had been put through Mary's soul. Of course it was. So the suffering that Jesus went through on our behalf before he died makes for extremely difficult reading. It makes difficult reading. So we come on to the resurrection, which is a little more cheerful. Now, there are a lot of details concerning the resurrection, the day of Jesus' resurrection. So I just want to deal with what happened to Mary of Magdala on that morning. Now, it was the morning after the Sabbath, and Mary had risen as early as she could and taken the spices to the tomb where she was going to perform the rites that the Jews had for burial. But when she gets there, she realizes the body's not there, it's been moved. So she finds Peter and John, tells them, they come along and they look into the tomb, and sure enough, Jesus' body is not there. So Peter and John go back home, wondering what has happened, leaving Mary Magdala at the grave. So she looks into the tomb again, and there she sees two angels, and they say to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" I mean, she was in deep distress because she couldn't perform the rites that the Jews felt was necessary. So she explains, they've taken the body of our Lord away, and I don't know where they've put it. Then she sees a man in the garden, and she thinks it's the gardener. So this man speaks to her, and he says again, "Woman, why are you weeping?" This great distress that she's in. And she says, "They've taken my Lord's body away, and I don't know where it is. If you know where it is, tell me, and I'll deal with it." Now, this was Jesus, of course. Now, he speaks to her, and it's quite likely that he speaks to her in Hebrew, and possibly Galilean Hebrew. And he says to her, "Mary." And at once she recognizes who it is, and she replies in kind in Hebrew, Rabboni, which means master or teacher. Now, she clings to him. Now, why would she do that? Obviously, in her mind, she must have been thinking, now, is this a vision I'm having? Is this a spirit? But holding Jesus, she realized that this was a person. But she must have remembered that Jesus had said that he was going to go back to his Father. So she might have thought, oh, he's going to disappear any minute. But he reassures her and says to her, "Mary, don't worry, I haven't yet ascended to my Father." But he was going to go back to his Father. So he said to her, "Go and tell the apostles what has happened." So reassured, she goes off and she finds the apostles back at home, and they're still weeping 2 days after Jesus' death, and they are still in deep grief, obviously. And she tells them what has happened, that she's met Jesus. Do they believe her? No, of course not. However, later that evening, Jesus appears to them, and this is then the beginning of their restoration, of their great faith that Jesus is the Messiah. The resurrection of Jesus Christ has great import for Christians. But we can't go into that at the moment. But suffice to say that it gives us assurances that Jesus is the Messiah, that he's now with his Father in heaven with great glory, and he now has enormous power in order to make sure that God's will is done not only in heaven, but also here on earth. So from deep grief, we now have great joy that Jesus has fulfilled all the prophecies and will now carry out the rest of the prophecies yet to be fulfilled. Thank you for watching, and God bless you all.